The question is as on the order paper. Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I am grateful to have the opportunity to speak in this debate, and I'm grateful that this debate has been secured. The focus of this debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, could not be more serious. Protecting our young people from sexual exploitation as they make the transition from childhood to adulthood must be a priority of this House. It goes to the heart of the kind of values we have, the value we place on our young people, the value we place on protecting the vulnerable, the values we have around dignity and fairness and consent. Child sexual exploitation is abhorrent and can have devastating and lifelong consequences on those who are victims of it, as well as the effects on their families and those closest to them. It must be a fundamental right for all children, for all young people, to be cared for and protected from harm, and to grow and thrive in an environment where they feel safe and where their rights are respected, as outlined by the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, which applies to all young people up to the age of 18 years old. Yet the report Old Enough to Know Better, published in November last year, makes for truly harrowing reading. As members of this House will know, the Children's Society report examined why older teenagers are particularly at risk of child sexual victimisation, the extent to which 16 and 17-year-olds are victims of sexual offences, and the report considered why they find it so very difficult to disclose their experiences and access help and support. What we know is that the justice system is not always as kind and supportive as it should be to victims of sexual crimes. How much more true is that of our young and vulnerable? Of course, the law recognises that those in this age range can legally consent to sexual relationships. But under the Children Act of 1989, they are still considered children, and as such, professionals, indeed wider society, has a legal duty to safeguard these young people from exploitation. Will 16 and 17-year-olds continue to be protected from sexual abuse within the family or from those in a position of trust, and from sexual exploitation offences such as child prostitution and pornography offences? They simply and appallingly do not receive the same kind of protections as younger children if they are targeted for sexual abuse by predatory adults. This is shocking and is put sharply into focus by the Children's Society report, which shows that 16 and 17-year-olds are more likely to be victims of rape or sexual offences than any other age group. And that is a situation that demands our considered response. Just as we find it appalling and evil when young children are sexually exploited, mistreated and abused, so too we should be outraged when those going through the transition from childhood to adulthood face such exploitation. And it is concerning that it seems that professionals are more likely to see those in the age range of 16 and 17 as complicit in their own exploitation, which shows a failure to understand the targeted and intense nature of grooming, and often mistaking consent to drink alcohol or participating in risky behaviours as consent to having sex. Clearly, more training needs to be carried out for professionals so that young people who need support and understanding, not to mention justice, receive it. Pointing to the age of legal sexual consent cannot be the means by which we fail to live up to our collective duty to protect our young people on the threshold of adulthood. In England and Wales, there is no specific offence of child sexual exploitation, and that is something worthy of examination. In Scotland, the definition of child sexual exploitation is any involvement of a child or young person below 18 years in sexual activity for which remuneration and cash or in kind is given to the youngest person or a third person or persons. The perpetrator will have power over the child by virtue of one or more of the following: age, emotional maturity, gender, physical strength, intellect and economic and other resources, for example, access to drugs. Under Scots law, there is specific protection for those aged 16 and 17 who are at risk of exploitation, with offences specifically to protect that particular demographic. The offence of the sexual abuse of trust makes it a criminal offence in Scotland for a person in a recognised position of authority to engage in sexual activity with anyone under the age of 18 in their care. The Protection of Children and Prevention of Sexual Offences Scotland Act 2009 makes it a criminal offence to involve children in child pornography and extends protection against indecent images to 16 and 17-year-olds and provides for restrictions to be placed on sex offenders. The Scottish Government introduced Scotland's National Action Plan to tackle child exploitation, which represents a comprehensive and ambitious strategy for addressing this very complex challenge. Getting it right for every child is a strategy to improve outcome in Scotland's public services that support the well-being of children and young people, and this is part of a framework for responding to sexual exploitation and will apply to young people up to the age of 18 years old. This, as well as Sex Offender Community Disclosure Scheme, also offers protection for 16 and 17-year-olds. And the Keeping Children Safe scheme enables parents, carers and guardians of those under 18 to make a formal request for disclosure of information about a named person who may have contact with their child if they are concerned that he or she might be a registered sex offender. Indeed, the Scottish Government will be launching a campaign to raise awareness of child sexual exploitation in the week beginning of 25th of January next year. And this high-profile campaign will be aimed primarily at parents and carers and those aged between 11 to 17 years old. It will include TV advertising and poster material, which will run for a 3-week period. In addition, partnership material is currently being developed in order to reach the youth audience, and a campaign website is also being developed that will highlight the risks as well as offering advice and support. A practitioner's toolkit will be made available on the website ahead of the launch, where interested parties will be able to download material for use in their local communities. We must continue to be vigilant in the protection of our young people, wherever they live in the UK. The Scottish Government has done much good work in this area, but there can be no room for complacency, and we must always examine all protections offered with a critical eye to ensure they continue to offer robust protections for all our young people, including those in the 16 and 17-year-old age bracket. And I'm not going to stand here today, Madam Deputy Speaker, and argue that in Scotland we think it is job done. Absolutely not. We must continue to be vigilant, as are those who would exploit our young people. And as the Honourable Member for North West Hampshire pointed out, those in care are at particular risk. Moreover, I believe the Children's Society's call for increasing the age for the application of child abduction warning notices is eminently sensible. It is my sincere hope that members in this House can learn from the good work and initiatives being undertaken by the Scottish Government in this area, because I know the Scottish Government will examine all measures taken by this House to see what it can learn in turn. We should also be learning lessons as to how countries further afield tackle this issue. As technology grows ever more sophisticated and those who would exploit our young people become ever more creative, we must all continue to be vigilant. We must not let our young people down. We must not allow the law to let our young people down. Young people travelling down the road of transition from childhood to adulthood are not being protected as they should be. They are not telling those in authority when they experience sexual exploitation. The Children's Society report points out how chronically underreported to the authorities such exploitation is. We know young people often feel that it's their fault when they are sexually exploited. We know it can have huge consequences for their development into full adulthood. The more we talk about this, the more we recognise this as a problem that actually exists, the more likely those who are exploited will feel able to report their ordeals. This is an issue which must be brought out of the shadows. We must talk about it and how it can occur, the ways and means through which these young people may be sexually exploited. We must remember that the onus for what happens to them cannot be placed on the shoulders of young, vulnerable people who can be manipulated by others who are far more worldly wise and cunning than they. Concluding that vulnerable young people of 16 and 17-year-olds are complicit in their exploitation lets the exploiters and sexual predators off the hook, and that only serves to heap insult upon injury. And let's not kid ourselves on. Child sexual exploitation is as much a reality in Scotland and across the UK as it is anywhere else around the world. And it is a reality we cannot ignore. We must tackle it collectively. No one is saying this will be easy, but it must not. It cannot be beyond the wit of politicians to draft laws to fully protect our young people from exploitation. Everything that may help must be explored fully. We need to make sure we create an environment which is as difficult for those who would prey upon our young and vulnerable and sexually exploit them as possible. We also need to create an environment where the victims of sexual predators and exploiters feel able and confident about speaking up to receive the support that they need. Surely, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's the least we can do.
Order.